And then let's see here. Okay. All right. Hopefully this is working. All right. I'm on a little delay here. Okay. Well, I've got 9:30, so let's go ahead and get started. For those of you that got my email, it snowed out here last night. There's enough snow on the ground that I just didn't feel safe driving into work right now. And I've also upgraded my equipment and chroma keyed. So, yeah, so hopefully it won't fall down. If not, you'll see the clutter in my office and my bookshelves. But that's okay. And you might hear a stray dog barking. That's my dogs. You might hear some kids in the background today. And you know what? That's totally fine. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover or finish up talking about carbohydrates. And on Tuesday, I got through most of the lecture. So, or most of the material, actually, I should say. So today, I just want to just review a little bit about carbohydrates. And then I'm going to talk about, you know, the importance of sugars and also the role of sugar in our diet. And then, of course, because there's problems with the most about, actually. There's other ones like sucralose. I'm just not as familiar with them, but I do know about aspartame. Okay. So, and then after I finish that, I will then answer any of your questions for reviewing for the test today. So if you want to email me, I actually have my email up and running. I'll hear it ping if somebody emails me. And you can also ask the questions in the chat. I can see them from my computer here. So I can answer those as well. So feel free to ask questions as we go along here. Okay, now I don't have a chalkboard today, so we're just going to have to use my PowerPoint that I have next to me. Okay, now carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, are a polymer, and they are a polymer made up of individual building blocks. So we have three basic types of these polymers, which would be starch, glycogen, and cellulose. That's the polymer. And the monomers, the building blocks, are glucose molecules. And these are similar in some ways to both proteins and nucleic acids, because proteins are a polymer, and their building block, of course, are the amino acids. And those amino acids are put together through a dehydration or a condensation reaction, okay? And we link those amino acids together, forming a peptide bond. Next, nucleic acids. Instead of 20 building blocks, RNA and DNA use 4 building blocks. And you guys know if it's DNA, you're using adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And if you're using RNA, you don't use thymine, you use uracil. And we stick all of these building blocks together in a dehydration condensation reaction, right? Where you get water out of it. And you string them together and you form a polymer of either DNA or RNA. And then we have, of course, the carbohydrates. You stick glucose molecules together in a condensation or dehydration reaction, and you get your polymer of starch, glycogen, or cellulose, depending on which one you're using. And remember, when I was in class, I drew on the board these very small differences between alpha and beta glucose, and remembering the difference, one forms glycogen and one forms starch. One forms cellulose and the other one forms, of course, glycogen and starch. Now, glycogen is very similar to starch, which is made by plants, except that it's a little bit more branching and a little bit more sticky. And then, of course, when you use a beta bond, you form cellulose. And animals don't digest cellulose. And as I'm giving this lecture right here, I should swing the camera around. My bird feeder is absolutely loaded with little house finches and house sparrows eating seeds. And they can digest the part of the seeds, but not the cellulose around the cells of those seeds. Okay, so that was our refresher on carbohydrates. I'm not going to get too much into it here, but what I want to talk about now is part of what carbohydrates do. Now, we know that they're used for more things than just energy. Remember, they're used for structures, they're used for a precursor to other molecules that our bodies make, including amino acids, nucleic acids, and even lipids. They're also used in cell recognition and cell signaling, okay? And then, of course, we know about carbohydrates as a long-term source of energy or a short-term source of energy. So if you're eating a complex carbohydrate, because you're breaking off those individual glucose molecules, it's a longer-term source of energy than a simple sugar like glucose or fructose. And on glucose and fructose, they're quickly absorbed into your body, and of course that causes an insulin release, which brings glucose into your cells. Okay, and then, if you're not exercising a lot and you're getting a lot of sugars, well, they get pulled into your adipose tissue. These are adipocytes, which are the cells, and that sugar gets converted to lipids, which means it's stored as fat. And then if you're exercising, a lot of that glucose will then be pulled into your muscles, and if it's pulled into your muscles, guess what? You can burn it for energy through cellular respiration, which you're going to learn after spring break. Cellular respiration is just awesome. I mean, it's like the center of our cell metabolism. And we burn glucose to generate ATP. Okay. Of course, I'm showing a potato here. Move that around. And I'm showing a potato that has lots of starch in it versus soft drinks that have lots of simple sugars. Okay, move my table over here a little bit closer. Oof, don't want to knock down my green screen. Okay, so let's take a look at simple carbs. Okay, monosaccharide. Saccharide just means saccharin, like sugar. Mono means one. So we have our glucose molecule. Notice that it's C6H12O6. That is its chemical formula. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. And this form of glucose has a ring structure, okay? And then we have another one that you can also find. And glucose is very common in like fruits. Fruits make lots and lots of glucose. Plants make glucose. And in fact, when you study photosynthesis, you'll learn how in the Calvin cycle, how carbon is actually fixed into organic molecules, eventually making glucose. The Calvin cycle doesn't actually make glucose, but it makes the precursors to glucose. We also have another one called fructose. And if you remember, glucose and fructose, our sugars, have a carbon chain. And then on top of that, or attached to that carbon chain, are functional groups. One of them is the hydroxyl, the OH that you see. And the OH, these things make it dissolvable in water. That's why you can dissolve like 40 grams of sugar in a soda can. It's only 12 ounces. I know, it's a lot of sugar. There's another functional group called the carbonyl group. It's that C double bonded to the oxygen. And in glucose, you notice it's at the top of it, which forms an aldose sugar. And then in fructose, it's down below, and that's causing a ketone sugar. Now, here's when we start talking about high fructose corn syrup, right? If you're like me, I love my sodas. I mean, it's like the one thing we all do that's bad, right? We all have our things. And for me, for a long time, I drank a lot of soda, like regular soda with all the sugar. And my rationale for doing that was I wasn't really gaining weight. I maintained a healthy body. Other than the fact that I got a couple cavities from drinking so much sugar. When I was much younger, I was like, I'm active, I'm young, I just burn off all of this sugar. And in my soft drinks, like my beloved Mountain Dew, it has what's called high fructose corn syrup. Now, high fructose corn syrup is about 55%, I just forgot the ratio, 55% glucose, 45% fructose. I may have that backwards. I apologize. I don't have my notes right in front of me. But the point is that it's almost an even mixture of fructose and glucose. And it's not that, yeah, and this is very, very sweet. Fructose is treated a little bit differently in our body. And yeah, it's very sweet. And because it's got the 5-ring structure, it's like I said, it goes and does different things. When they do studies of animals that have just glucose versus just fructose, we realize there are differences between them. And in the 1980s, we noticed that our population started to become larger. We started having higher rates of obesity and all of the metabolic problems associated with obesity, including like, heart or vascular disease, which includes heart disease as well, and increased risk of diabetes. Even some risk of cancers were starting to increase. So in the 1980s, there was this really big push, excuse me, to move away from fat. Because it was thought that, hey, if we're gaining fat, if we have a lot of fat in our diet, you eat more fat, you gain more fat, right? Kind of made sense. And fat also is very energy dense, much more so than carbohydrates. So what happened in the 1980s, the world went fat-free, or at least the U.S. went fat-free. Now, fat tastes good. So the way that they would do everything fat-free is they started to load it with sugar. So now sugar is in everything, including this high fructose corn syrup. And our industry loves high fructose corn syrup because it tastes good, it's cheap to make, including glucose and fructose. And just to remind you, glucose and fructose are both real sugars. They're both made by plants. And so I love it whenever I hear like a soda is made up of real sugar. It's all real sugar. Glucose, fructose, corn syrup is all sugar. And it doesn't matter where you make it. You can make it in a plant, you can eat it in a strawberry or make it in a plant. It's still the same thing. But I digress a little bit here. As the country went fat-free and started increasing their sugar intake, which you can see here, sugar consumption increased, so did obesity. Okay, now let me pull up my slides here so I can see what we're doing. I know you guys can see it, but I've got to be able to see it too. Okay. All right. So now, after years of studying high fructose corn syrup, there's been a lot of problems with it. So there's been a lot of studies with the potential health threats of these HFCs, which are the high fructose corn syrup. And the thing is, I had to change the way I think about things. I had to change my habits based on all of the data that kept coming out. And granted, I was slow to accept this. And then one day, I went in for my regular checkup, and I was in my early 30s, and basically I got my blood work done. And what happened was I had high triglycerides. I know, I was in my early 30s, I went hiking, I worked out, I was active, I was not obese in terms of my fat content. I was obese in terms of height to weight, but I worked out, so I had muscle. I didn't have a punch like I kind of have now. And I was shocked, like, why in the world would I have high triglycerides? And high triglycerides are a measure of blood fat. And as the nurse is going over this with me, I'm like, do I have a genetic predisposition for, this problem? I know that my family has had it, my dad, my grandparents. And she asked me one question. She goes, do you drink soda? And I was like, I had to hang my head. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, how much? And I was like, I don't know that I want to admit that, but let's say 2 to 3 Mountain Dews a day or more. Yeah, I know you're like, man, that's a lot. And it is a lot. And as a result of that, it caused me to have high triglycerides. it turns out that my one data point is what happened to me. I'm not alone. People that consume high amounts of sugar often have high triglycerides, which are blood fat, and that can lead to vascular disease as you start building up plaque in your arteries. Oh, man. Now, it doesn't stop there, right? It turns out that for whatever reason, having too much sugar in our diet can negatively affect the aging process. This is incredibly complicated. In fact, there's a podcast I'm listening to right now. I forgot the name of it. It's really good. It's a doctor from Stanford, and he's discussing intermittent eating and when you limit your eating times, and going into all of the studies about how we change when we eat and how that increases our longevity and by improving our health outcomes. So one of the problems with eating a lot of sugar is your cells constantly have lots of sugar available to them. All right, and there's lots of problems with this aging process, and I'm not going to go into it here. But your cells, with all the extra energy, it could affect things like if you're drinking sugar at night, that might affect something called autophagy, for instance. And we'll learn about this in a few weeks. But autophagy, auto means cell, phagy means eating, right? So you've got these lysosomes, which are these cellular structures inside your body. Lysosomes. Some means body, lys means to split. A lysosome to your cells is like your stomach to you. Lysosomes go around and they turn over old organelles. They eat them. And part of that autophagy occurs at night, and that is part of our regenerative process. And as we age, that autophagy slows down, and apparently when you eat and eating too much sugar can affect this autophagy, right? So this is one way that this negatively affects the aging process. And like I said, aging is an incredibly complex problem. We've made incredible breakthroughs in recent years on understanding aging and how we can maybe start resetting the clock a little bit. And as I, of course, look at myself in this gray beard, I love the gray beard, but I don't necessarily like, the joints breaking down and the fact that, I have less energy than I used to. Because of the aging process. So one of the things that I have done is basically cut soda out of my diet. Regular sugar soda. If you guys know me, I drink diet now. Okay. It turns out that our livers are really important organs. I mean, that goes without saying. We all know that. The livers detoxify so many things in our body. They're also involved with releasing of insulin, or the pancreas is releasing insulin as well. Well, it turns out that people that eat a lot of, that consume a lot of sugar also get what is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's a problem, right? Because by getting all of these fat buildups in your liver, guess what? Your liver doesn't function as well, and, well, that lowers your health outcomes. And then there's other things about increasing incidences of gout and things like that. So the problem here is, whenever we have our diet, there are small changes we can do to improve our diet that can improve our health outcomes, like lower triglyceride levels, changes in our gut microbiome that are very important. And some of those changes is I'm not saying cut out sugar. I'm not saying you should do a keto diet. I'm not a dietitian. But from everything that, I've read and from all these studies coming out, that cutting sugar or reducing the amount of sugar we get in our diet is incredibly important for improving our health. And if we improve our health, then we improve our longevity and we live longer, healthier lives. And there are very few times when I'm like, don't ever do something. You can go have a soda, just you don't want a significant portion of your diet coming from, that Mountain Dew, which has 240 calories, which is almost 12% of an average person's caloric intake during the day. I know, that's a lot. And so, if you're drinking 2 or 3 sodas or a couple sodas a day and getting a lot of sugar in your diet, that might be something you want to consider reducing in your life. And like I said, I'm not advocating for any particular type of diet or what to eat and what not to eat. It's just a good idea to lower or reduce your intake of soda. And for those of you that are concerned about health, I would definitely consider talking to dietitians to help guide you through that process. Okay. So in the lecture slides here, basically I just put in a whole bunch of articles for you guys to go read that kind of say, hey, look, too much sugar, especially too much fructose, high fructose corn syrup, isn't that good. It does things like increase blood pressure, it increases your rate of type 2 diabetes. That's, of course, the adult onset of type of diabetes, where basically you become insulin resistant, so you have elevated glucose levels in your blood. And having too much glucose in your blood, in humans, not mice, but in humans, high levels of glucose are associated with negative health outcomes and a shorter lifespan. So I'm learning this all from this really cool podcast I've been listening to, and I've been hearing of this for years. So, yeah. Cut back on the sugar, here's some more. It increases your propensity for diabetes, body weight. And I'll say that when I quit drinking diet soda, I actually lost a few pounds. Like less than 5, though. Okay. And there's more. This is how it leads to heart disease. So, yeah, we know that don't drink too much of it. Watch the soda intake. I know. It was hard. It was hard quitting. I don't ever really drink regular sodas anymore at all. So, I have a soda habit. And it happens to the best of us, right? If you don't drink soda, don't get started. So the question now is, what about artificial sweeteners? And I will tell you right now, they're safe. They're safe. They're safe to consume. Water is safe to consume. Caffeine is safe to consume. This is a very nuanced discussion moving forward. In fact, that's my new kick terms now. My new thing is everything is nuanced, because I feel like in our world today that nuance has died in social media. All right. So let's take a look here. What I'm showing are 2 molecules. This is called sucralose, and basically sucrose, if you look carefully, you'll see that sucrose is a disaccharide. It's 2 sugars. Di means 2, so it's a molecule of glucose attached to a molecule of fructose. Sucralose is, if you look, there are about 3 added chlorine atoms to the sucrose. 1 on the glucose part, 2 on the fructose part, if I'm looking at that correctly. Okay. Different shape. Shape matters. We have enzymes that can break down sucrose. It tastes sweet to us. We break it down. We split it into glucose and fructose. And once it's split down, our bodies deal with the 2 sugars respectively. And we have metabolic pathways to do that. Chlorine. It's much larger. Excuse me. Chlorine. Excuse me. If you notice, the chlorine is replacing some hydroxyl groups. And chlorine is much larger than oxygen, right? Because oxygen only has 8, it's got 8 electrons. So it's only got 2 in the inner shell, 6 in the outer shell. Chlorine is element number 17. So you've got the inner shell, you've got the middle shell with 8, and then you've got a larger third shell. So instead of being, like this big, chlorine is like this. What that means is, because you've replaced those hydroxyl groups and those methyl groups with chlorine, it has a different shape. So the idea is that we don't have any enzymes to break this down, So we take in sucralose. It tastes sweet because our taste buds can't tell the difference. But the enzymes that break it down, or there's no enzymes to break it down, since we don't have enzymes to break down sucralose, sucrose, which is this artificial sweetener, it passes through us basically unchanged. Most of it does. But I'm not familiar with that one as much. So we're going to talk about aspartame. And like I said, this is complicated, and people have very, very strong opinions about like the safety of aspartame. And man, I did a video earlier last year on aspartame, and like it got like 2,500 views like almost instantaneously. And the comments, I've left them all up. I mean, there were people that were, calling me out. People were like, thank you. People disagreed. But it elicited this very strong response. And man, this is a nuanced response here. So the question is, as I went away from a high sugar diet, or as people, or you might be considering reducing your diet, reducing the sugar in your diet, what about replacing that with sweeteners, because they are not supposed to have any calories? So let's look at this one. This is aspartame. All right. So if you look carefully, you will see that it is a dipeptide. 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 I see. If you look at it, there's a carboxyl end on the other side there. There's an amino group. And then we see another peptide bond between the carbon and the double bond with the oxygen and that nitrogen. That's our peptide bond. And what we're looking at is two amino acids. One is called phenylalanine, and the other one is aspartic acid. Now, it's a little bit different because there's an extra methanol group attached to this. Okay, methanol is, of course, an alcohol. It's a one carbon alcohol. It's got carbon attached to an OH group. But basically, aspartame is more or less a dipeptide. And the minute you are drinking diet soda, I'm actually not drinking diet soda. No, that's not moonshine. It's tea. I made some Earl Grey tea here. Yes, I am drinking 1.5 liters of tea in the morning. I do it over several hours. I know, that's a lot of tea, but I like my tea, and it's better than drinking soda. But when you drink a soda, and it's got aspartame in it, what happens is the aspartame gets into your stomach, and we have digestive enzymes, and it's a very acidic environment. So what happens is it splits into aspartic acid, which is an amino acid that we use, and it also splits into phenylalanine, another type of amino acid that we use, and of course you produce some methanol. And you may have heard that methanol is bad for you because it causes blindness. You get more methanol in a glass of orange juice than you do drinking a diet soda with methanol. There's just not a lot there, so your body can actually deal with it without having a negative consequence here. People will point out that you can get formaldehyde also. Formaldehyde, we used it for decades to preserve all kinds of animals in museums so we can preserve their tissues. Formaldehyde is really bad. But once again, even if small amounts of it are made, which we make small amounts of formaldehyde, we get small amounts in our diet, tiny amounts, and our livers can digest it. Now, that doesn't mean you can go drink formaldehyde. It will kill you. So we're drinking too much water. So we're drinking too much tea or too much caffeine. Okay. So the idea here is that aspartame has been around since at least the 1980s. I think it was developed maybe in the 60s or 70s. I forget the exact date, but it's been widely used for a long time. So artificial sweetener like aspartame, we know it's safe. Okay? We know it's safe. Now, here's the nuance. Because you've probably seen on the web somewhere, that like, aspartame is the worst thing you can ever put in your body. Really, people have been drinking aspartame and consuming aspartame for decades, and we have yet to see any increase in cancer or memory loss or all of these problems that people claim about aspartame. Okay? Now, so it has caffeine. I'm well under the amount that I can consume, so it's safe. But if I have a lot of caffeine, well, caffeine can actually kill you if you have too much of it. You can also drink too much water. Yes, if you drink a few gallons of water in an hour, you might die of something called hyponatremia. All right, that's where you basically lose electrolyte balance and your muscles don't function correctly and your heart stops. And people actually do die of drinking too much water. So what we're talking about here is the poison, the dose makes the poison. So take too much caffeine, it can kill you. And well, under that, it's just a stimulant that can get you pepped up. We need water, of course. And then now we get to like aspartame. The amount in your diet drinks is considered safe by the FDA based on decades of research. And in fact, you would have to drink like 20 diet sodas a day to exceed the recommended daily allowance. Okay, now that being said, I said it's safe. Now the next question is, well, is it good for us? And the answer is, once again, might not be all that great for us. At best, it's neutral. At best, it is a replacement for sugar sweetened. And in fact, the people with diabetes, they recommend that you use artificial sweeteners because it doesn't cause elevated glucose levels in your blood. Okay, here's where it gets complicated, okay? Man, I know, I've dug my heels in for a long time thinking, it was just safe, you know, when you have aspartame, it just splits into the 2 amino acids, the methanol pops off, who cares, your body digests it. These are just amino acids that my body needs anyway, so what's the problem here? And I was like, you tell me how drinking it, consuming a dipeptide could be bad for your health. And it turns out, yeah, it might not be all that healthy for us. And this is something we'll expand on later when we start talking about Chapter 7 in the Cell. But basically, there's been some research that has come out that people that drink diet sodas, they often have the same rates of metabolic problems or metabolic disease as people that drink regular soda. I know. You switch to diet soda, and then most people still have the same problems of obesity, diabetes, vascular disease. And, you know, why in the world would that be? You're reducing your calories. And there are a lot of theories and a lot of explanations for that. I'm not going to get into them here. But I will get into it here, actually. But one of them that might be problematic is that we're seeing that it changes your gut flora. Now, inside of every one of us, we have trillions. That's trillions with the T. 1 times 10 to the 12 bacteria. That's a lot of bacteria. We also have over 1,000 different types. And depending on where you live, who you live with, which is your environment, what you eat, environment, and even your own genetics, which is what you inherit, that will affect your gut microbiome. We know that eating a high sugar, high fat diet negatively affects your gut microbiome. It reduces diversity and promotes bacteria that might cause inflammation and other problems. When you have artificial sweeteners like aspartame, we know it's causing changes in our gut flora. And those changes can actually lead to higher rates of obesity. Because what happens is, you know, nutrition is very complicated, and like I said, I'm not trying to give out nutritional advice because I'm not a nutritionist here, but all foods have, you know, energy stored in the bonds, right? And so the bacteria in our gut help break down our food and liberate it. And if you promote bacteria that are very efficient at breaking down food, guess what? You have more calories available to you out of the same amount of food. So there's some issues going on with that change in the gut microbiome that might lead to higher rates of diabetes. And of course, this is now a very, very active area of research that people are looking into. And it's kind of exciting, actually. I mean, we are learning a lot about how our habits influence our gut microbiome and how our gut microbiome in turn influences us. And I'm going to talk much more about the gut microbiome in a few weeks when we get to the cell. I know our chapters are always very heavy on like the organelles of a eukaryotic cell, but I think a tad bit of microbiology is a little bit helpful as well. So we'll come back to that. Okay. Yeah. So here's some references for you guys. You know, the dark side of artificial sweeteners. That's a Science Daily. You can actually go get the actual article from Science Daily. I like reading Science Daily because it's written by people that are science writers, and I can understand the articles. Some of the peer-reviewed literature is behind paywalls, so you might have access to it, and they can be full of jargon, which makes them very difficult to understand. But yeah, there's some, like the dark side, you know, sucralose affects glycemic and hormonal response to glucose load, right? So yeah, there might be some issues here with that. Okay, let me pull up my screen here. And so basically, that's it for artificial sweeteners. The whole idea here is, yeah, they're safe. They're safe to consume. They're not going to cause, you know, all these problems that you see promoted on the web, especially with if you are under the daily allowance. I mean, remember, something that's important, the poison is in the dose, okay? So lots of things that we consume naturally, you consume too much of it, it's detrimental. If you're under the recommended daily allowance, you're good. Is it healthy for us? Or is it neutral? And the answer is probably not. Probably not. So, like I said, for years I dug my heels in, as you notice, whether it was the role of exercise on weight loss, or it was okay to drink sugar, or is it okay to drink artificial sweeteners. You know, the science continually improves. We keep learning more and more. And basically, you know, now I'm like, I got to cut out the artificial sweeteners in my diet so much. But one thing, you know, I always like to say, it's not a function of cutting them out completely, although that's, of course, best, but it's all about moderation. So trying to cut back on sodas, really hard, because they are safe, which, you know, you get, I want my Diet Mountain Dew or my Diet Pepsi. But the problem is that they might not be that healthy for us because they might lead to problems with obesity, vascular, and other metabolic problems associated with being obese. So, there it is. All right. Now, since I'm done with carbohydrates, you guys have basically a test that I will put out here pretty soon for you guys, and it will be due on Sunday. So I'm right here right now. If anybody wants to type in a question, just checking here. Okay. I think the email distribution list, and I'm not sure. Somebody said they didn't get the email. I'm sorry about that. I sent it to the class list, so I don't have any other way of sending out the email. Sorry about showing up to an empty lecture hall. I have done that before. I feel your pain. I've definitely done that before. But let's see. Anybody have any questions at all here? Okay. Anything about the test? Here I am. Okay, well, you know what? If you don't have a question right now, that's fine. You can email me your questions, especially before 12:30. I will go live again here in about an hour and a half for the next class. And you guys stay in, stay safe. And like I said, I'll get the test up for you later today. It'll be due Sunday, and it'll cover chapters 1 through 5. All right. Till next time. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Y'all have a good weekend.